If you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. Our book club selection today is the brand new book from Dar Jamail, The End of Ice, Bearing Witness and Finding Meaning in the Path of Climate Disruption. The dedication of the book. This book is dedicated to the future generations of all species. Know that there were many of us who did what we could. This is from the introduction. The fall lasts long enough that I have time to watch the blue ice race upward, eons of time compressed into glacial ice, flashing by in fractions of seconds. I assume I've fallen far enough that I've pulled my climbing partner, Sean, into the crevasse with me. This is what it's like to die in the mountains, a voice in my head tells me. Just as my mind completes that thought, the rope wrenches my climbing harness up. I bounce languidly up and down as the dynamic physics inherent in the rope play themselves out. Somehow, Sean has checked my fall while still on the surface of the glacier. I brush the snow and chunks of ice from my hair, arms, and chest and pull down the sleeves of my shirt. Finding my glacier glasses hanging from the pocket of my climbing bib, I tuck them away. I check myself for injuries and incredibly find none. Assessing my situation, I find there's no ice shelf nearby to ease the tension from the rope, so Sean can begin setting up a pulley system to extract me. I look down. Nothing but blackness. I look at the wall of blue ice directly in front of me, take a deep breath, and peer up into the tiny hole into which I'd fallen when I'd punched through the snow bridge spanning the crevasse. The same bridge Sean had crossed without incident as we made our way up Alaska's Matanuska Glacier toward Mount Marcus Baker in the Chugach Range. You get to look down one more time, then that's it, I tell myself out loud. Again, there's only a black and void yawning beneath me, swallowing everything, even sound. My stomach clenches. I remind myself to breathe. Sean, are you okay? I yell as I clamp my mechanical ascenders to the rope in preparation to climb up. Yeah, I'm all right, but I'm right on the edge, he calls back. I can't set an anchor to get out of the system, so don't ascend. We're going to have to wait for the other guys to catch up. Time passes. The onset of hyperthermia means I can't control my body from periodically shaking. To ignore my fear of dying, I gaze meditatively at the ice a few feet in front of me as I dangle. The miniature air pockets found in the whiter ice near the top of the glacier have long since been compressed, producing the mesmerizing beauty of centuries-old turquoise ice. Slightly deeper into the crevasse is ice that has been there since long before the Neanderthals. I hang suspended in silence, mindful not to move out of fear of dislodging Sean. Giving my full attention to the ice immediately within my vision, I focus on how the gently refracting light from above seems to penetrate and reflect off the perfectly smooth wall. Staring into it, the blue seems infinite. Despite the danger of my situation, the glacier's beauty calms me. Delicate snowflakes and their infinite possibilities of form land on mountainous terrain. Under its own weight, the snow is compressed into glaciers that scour and shape the face of the earth. Countless millions of tons of weight, aided by the force of gravity, push and pull these frozen rivers downhill, carving out cirques and troughs from uplifted geologic plates and sculpting the majestic heights of mountains that I have been drawn to since I was young. Eventually, our other two teammates arrive and work to extract Sean from his perch just 6 inches from the edge of the crevasse. All three of them set up a three-way pulley system. Laboriously, my teammates begin to haul me up, inches at a time, out of what nearly became my tomb. I continue to focus on the delicately shifting blades of blue in the ice as I draw closer to the surface, mesmerized by its raw beauty. My teammates pull me up to the lip of the crevasse. I repeatedly plunge the pick of my ice axe into the snow and haul myself out, never before as grateful for being on top of a glacier. I stand and gaze up at the mountain to the west, behind which the sun has just set. Snow plumes stream off one of its ridges, turned into ruddy red ribbons by the setting snow. Snowflakes flicker as they float into space. As relief floods my shivering body, I roar in gratitude and relief. Utterly overwhelmed by being alive and surrounded by the beauty of the mountain world, I hug each of my 3 climbing partners. Now safe, it sinks in how close to death I've been. That was Earth Day 2003. In hindsight, I believe the emotion I felt then stemmed in part from something else, a deeper consciousness that the ice that I had seen, which had existed for eons, was vanishing. 7 years of climbing in Alaska had provided me with a front row seat from where I could witness the dramatic impact of human-caused climate disruption. Each year we found the toe of the glacier had shriveled further. Each year for the annual early ice season festival on this glacier, we found ourselves hiking further up the crusty frozen mud left behind by rapidly retreating terminus. Each year the parking lot was moved closer to the glacier, only to be left further away as the ice withdrew. Even sections of Denali, which stands over 20,000 feet tall and is roughly 250 miles from the Arctic Circle, had undergone startling changes. The ice of its glaciers was disappearing quickly. Our planet is rapidly changing, and what we are witnessing is unlike anything that has occurred in nature or even geologic history. The heat-trapping nature of carbon dioxide and methane, both greenhouse gases, has been scientific fact for decades, and according to NASA, there is no question that increased levels of greenhouse gases must cause the Earth to warm in response. Evidence shows the greenhouse gas emissions are causing the Earth to warm 10 times faster than it should. And the ramifications of this are being felt quite literally throughout the entire biosphere. And then, he goes on, oceans are warming, etc. The End of Ice by Dar Jamail.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a week. I mean, it's okay. Here's the bottom line. The FBI, and everybody's heard this by now. The FBI is back in 2016, before the election even had happened. People in the FBI are looking around going, what's going on here with Donald Trump? It sure looks like this guy is dancing to the tune of Russia. Now, there's a couple of questions that I think are worth asking here, and a couple of issues that are worth bringing out. And, I would love to hear your opinion on this too. A lot of this is just, frankly, opinion right now. But to what extent could it be that Donald Trump's embrace of Vladimir Putin and Russian perspectives and Russian historical narratives, the Russians went into Afghanistan, for example, because terrorists were coming out of Afghanistan, not because of the Brzezinski doctrine. No, it wasn't Brzezinski. It was whoever the Russian leader was at the time. But in any case, is it that Trump is just following his economic interests? That he thinks that if he does a deal, if he cuts a deal, if he behaves in a way that keeps Russia very, very happy, that the consequence of behaving that way will be that Russia then, in turn, will say to him, cool, you want to have a Trump Tower in Moscow? We're on it. In other words, is this entirely about that and about keeping the spigot open? The millions of dollars that have come from Russia via the NRA for Republican candidates, including a number of Republican senators, and of course all the money that is going to the Republic and back channel help, right? A little work from the Internet Research Agency and all that kind of stuff. Is it that Trump is just protecting his own political and economic interests? Or is it that he's actually, in other words, that would make him, I suppose, the unwitting dupe of Russians because he's doing it because he wants the money? Or is there something very different here? I mean, is it possible that the President of the United States actually has a higher loyalty to a foreign country than to the United States. And if that's the context, if that's the case, is it that his loyalty to Russia is part of a larger loyalty to other autocrats and oligarchs as opposed to a loyalty to democracy? And could that flow out of his worldview of being, a billionaire oligarch? He loves Duterte, he loves Sisi in Egypt, Duterte in the Philippines, Erdogan in Turkey. Of course, he's got a Trump hotel in Turkey. I mean, all these countries with autocratic leaders, North Korea, Kim Jong-un, President Xi of China, all these autocrats, Trump seems to embrace. So could it be that if your first commitment is to capitalism and the profit motive, rather than your first commitment being to small d democracy and a small r republic, could it be that that essentially requires you to support these oligarchs? This is like a really consequential question. And then if that's the case, if it's possible that what Donald Trump is really all about is destabilizing the United States, either because, hey, Putin wants it and so he's going to do it because Putin's got something on him, or if he's trying to destabilize the United States, not because he's dancing to the tune of Russia or Putin or anybody else, but because he shares the opinion along with other autocratic leaders around the world. Like I said, Duterte, Erdogan, Viktor Orban in Hungary, what's his name, the guy who's running Poland, the leader of the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland party, the new neo-Nazi right party in Germany, the Marine Le Pen group in France. You find this all over the world, that there are these autocrats, these oligarchs, who are fundamentally hostile to democracy because democracy makes it harder for them to basically own politicians. And owning politicians is the name of the game. We know now Len Blavatnik, this is this U.S.-UK citizen who is a Ukrainian-born billionaire, buddies with the Russians. Him and his organizations passed along $3.5 million to Mitch McConnell. This is presumably money coming out of Russia, this calamari posting over Democratic Underground over the weekend on Friday. Then old Mitch boy, he writes, is bought and paid for. Mitch McConnell, $3.5 million through this guy. Lindsey Graham, $800,000. Marco Rubio, $1.5 million. John Kasich, $250,000. Scott Walker, $1.1 million. Is it that they're basically owned? Is that what's going on? For that matter, which raises the really interesting question, is Mitch McConnell owned, in this case, not necessarily by the Russians, although they donated apparently $3.5 million to his campaign, or, the two $25 million contributions from Shelley Adelson to McConnell's Senate Leadership Fund? Is it that, or is it that Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, her father is like this major Taiwanese shipping magnate who makes his money with China, with international trade. And, when he married Elaine Chao, he went from being a poor politician to being a multi-millionaire. And suddenly her family started pouring money into his political campaigns and his career. The NRA last year, $54 million that they spent. And then this whole thing with Elaine Chao is getting very, very interesting. The Bank of China extends a $37 million loan to the Chao family shipping company, Foremost. In May of 2016, Elaine's sister, Angela Chao, is elected to the board of directors of the Bank of China, which now partners with Russia's VTB Bank. That's the bank that's under sanctions that Donald Trump was trying to get the sanctions lifted because that was the bank that was going to fund his Trump Tower Russia. So not only McConnell has links to China via the Chao connection, but also the Chao's family's interlinks with Russia. And thus, we see that Mitch McConnell has blocked every piece of legislation trying to protect the special counsel's investigation. He must be terrified of being caught. And that probably explains why back in 2016, when President Obama went to Mitch McConnell and said, "You're the leader of the Senate. It looks like the Russians are messing with the election. We need to do something about this." Mitch McConnell basically said no. Which raises an even larger question. Right now, the one guy who is keeping the Senate shut down, keeping the government shut down, is Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell would allow a vote on opening the government in the Senate, it would pass, and it would pass with a veto-proof majority. And that vote has already been had in the House. And if it was vetoed, the veto would be overturned. So the one guy who could open the government tomorrow morning, this afternoon, is Mitch McConnell. And he's refusing to do it. Which raises this really bizarre question. And I want you to think seriously about this question. Because just even asking this question is a frightening thing. Is it possible that the government shut down itself, which we know basically was completely unnecessary? Trump was ready to sign the legislation that just again passed the House. It passed the Senate unanimously on December 19th of last year. Trump was ready to sign that legislation that would have kept the government open and extended the negotiations and would have given him $1.2 billion for his damn wall. Trump was ready to go along with that, and then the next day he says no. Why? The common story is that he said no because Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Rush Limbaugh told him to say no. But who told them to say no? Is this, is this part of a campaign to destroy democracy in the United States? Is that what Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are doing? And if so, are they doing it at the behest of Vladimir Putin? Or are they doing it at the behest of the fossil fuel billionaires, the Kochs or the Adelsons? He's a gambling billionaire, or Robert Mercer. I mean, why are these guys trying to kneecap us? Is it possible that the government shutdown itself is part of a broader conspiracy to bring America to her knees? To take this country down, to finally destroy our faith in our own government, the faith that Ronald Reagan started attacking when he was inaugurated in 1981, and in that first inaugural address said, "The government is not the solution to your problem, the government is the problem." That was the beginning. When Reagan came into office and said that, the day before he said that, well over 70-80% of Americans believed the government could solve problems. Now it's around 16%. This has been a relentless campaign for 50 years by Republicans and billionaire oligarchs to cause us to think that the government can never do anything right. Why? Because the government is the major impediment to billionaires polluting the air, ripping off their employees, cutting their own taxes by owning politicians. The government's the only thing that can stop that. So of course the billionaires want to take out the government. So is this a Putin campaign? Is this an oligarch campaign? Is it both? Is it neither? Is the government shutdown that Donald Trump basically willed into being overnight, and that Mitch McConnell has completely gone along with throughout the entire process, are Obama, Pence, and McConnell being told to do this by Russians or somebody else? Are they being told to do it by the billionaire oligarchs who are libertarians and don't believe that the government should even be running anyway outside of having an army? Could that be it? I mean, is the end game here to prove to Americans, oh, we don't need no stinking government. Look at it. It ran for a whole month with no side effects, without government. I mean, what is the end game here? What are these guys trying to prove? How much damage do they want to accomplish? How much damage do they want to inflict on this nation before they can dust their hands off and say, mission accomplished? It's 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with your calls in just a moment. 19 minutes past the hour, sorry.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day in just a moment. and welcome back. Boy, a lot going on, just a lot going on. And this question, I think, fundamentally, this question, what do we do with this? Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, Professor, check this out. The Russians, according to the New York Times, the U.S. president is an operative for the Russians, right? If that is the case, everybody's thinking, well, impeachment. But there's another solution. I understand, because I spoke to a librarian, and I used to work at a library, that if this is true, that the president is an operative, then it's up to the attorney general to go and arrest him. You know anything about that? Check it out, and I'll be listening to your program. I know you're a civic guy, but check that out, because I don't know. But that blew my mind.
Well, no, it's technically it's true, Morris. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. And so, if somebody was going to arrest the president, it would it wouldn't necessarily have to be the Attorney General. I mean, it could be any authorized law enforcement officer in the federal government at the behest of the Attorney General.
Amen.
Yeah, so... But, first you have to have charges and all that kind of stuff. And also there's this debate, the Justice Department has been saying all the way back to Reagan's time, that actually all the way back to Nixon's time. Nixon, the criminal, his Justice Department said, no, you can't arrest a president. Reagan, the criminal, his Justice Department said, no, you can't arrest a president. And Bush Jr., the criminal, his Justice Department said, no, you can't arrest a president. So, kind of not surprised by those things, but we'll see where it goes. Morris, thanks for the call. Patrick in Mason, Ohio. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Tom, how's it going today? Look, you're on the button here. The only thing that can control rich people versus basically everybody else is government. It's the only thing that can contain them, because if not, they will crush us with the weight of their money. That's why they're trying to destroy the government from within.
Yep. Agreed.
So
Agreed.
These are
Which
things that, I've been putting one and one together, for a number of years after listening to you, and then watching the debacle with Gray Davis as he got, railroaded by that recall. And I didn't pay attention to politics until then, and because he said something about energy companies in Texas, and I wonder, what the heck is he talking about? Then Enron happened. Right. And then I was like, that's what's going on. So people have to learn to look at see the stuff that the great Oz doesn't want you to see.
Yeah, well, with Enron, and a lot of people are frankly not even old enough to remember it, but with Enron, what you had was a situation where a private for-profit corporation did not like the way that the governor of California was behaving, and they decided to take him down. And they did. They ran these rolling blackouts across California, across the West Coast. And while we got to listen later to the tapes of the Enron guys laughing about it, no, Grandma's going to have a fit. And then they used the popular dissatisfaction and anger around that and the price increases that were associated with it to kick out Gray Davis and replace him with Schwarzenegger. And here we are. I mean, California fortunately recovered from that. But that was about as dirty a dirty trick as you can play, Patrick.
That's I tell people basically what I told you about the rich and their money crushing us.
Yeah.
We see that, in all of these, the lobbies.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. Patrick, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's 23 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back. Is Donald Trump a foreign agent? And if so, is shutting the government down exactly what another government might want? We'll be back. So the biggest question of the day is, is Donald Trump shutting the government down part of a Russian plan, a Koch brothers plan, an Adelson plan, a Mercer plan? Is it the part of some foreign autocrat or domestic billionaire autocrat, wannabe autocrat, to damage the United States government? And if so, how much damage do they want to inflict on us before they say, okay, done? So I want to toss that out. By the way, Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be with us for the entire second hour of our program today, taking your calls. And then in the third hour, we're going to get into treason and privatization of our schools. And apropos of that, the Los Angeles teachers went on strike this morning. And this follows, I think this is the 8th or 10th state now that has seen substantial teacher strikes. We had them just across the river here in Washington state just before the elections, in a number of other states before the elections. And in many cases, I believe in most all cases, the teachers won. But the main thing that the teachers are striking against in Los Angeles, and we need to point this out because this is part of all the same fabric, and that is the takeover of America by oligarchs who put money above patriotism. They're more concerned with how much cash they can make than they are with whether or not we have functioning public schools. The whole charter school movement, as it were, supported by billionaires like Bill Gates and Betsy DeVos, is all about turning public education, which is a multi-hundred-billion-dollar enterprise every year, turning that from a public function, which was efficient, relatively low cost, and for most of my lifetime provided one hell of a good public school system, of destroying that and replacing it with a for-profit school system where, in high net worth areas, you've got really high performing schools, and in poor areas, not so much. And almost half of, in fact, perhaps more, somewhere in the neighborhood of half of all the schooling in Los Angeles now is being done by charter schools that by and large are not unionized and that by and large suck resources out of local public schools, which is why in some cases you have 40, 50 students in a classroom in Los Angeles, which is obscene. I mean, it's not only terrible and wrong, it's obscene. It's bad for the kids, it's bad for the teachers, it's bad for the system. It's exactly, therefore, what the oligarchs want, the people who believe that the government has no function other than running an army. And even that they shouldn't do. We should have Blackwater fight our wars for us instead. We should privatize everything. Why? So some oligarch can make a fortune on it. And why do we want to diminish the role of government? Because government can restrain oligarchs. Government is the only force that can hold back a giant corporation from ripping you off. Government is the only force that can prevent a billionaire from buying the politicians who are going to then screw you. Government is the only force that has that ability, the protective and police functions of government. So of course the oligarchs hate government. Of course the international oligarchs hate government. So how much damage will Donald Trump and his America-hating buddies have to inflict on the United States? How much damage will Mitch McConnell have to inflict on the United States before, his wife's Chinese business partners say, okay, cool, enough? Or before Putin says, okay, you've done enough. I guess that was worth that $3 million in contributions. How much damage has to be done? Or is this all a completely innocent thing? Is Donald Trump just a totally naive do-gooder who somehow doesn't want his discussions with Putin to be recorded?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your thoughts on these issues in just a moment. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier, he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor." Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, The first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And Lewis in Chicago. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. I just have to totally disagree with you on your perception of Trump. I'm sorry, I'm busy right now. But your perception that Trump is doing anything in regards to this Russian stuff. We already know that the dossier was a fake by Steele. He admits it himself.
Actually, there has been nothing in the dossier so far, not one single thing that has been proved to be untrue. There are a couple of things like did he hire hookers to pee on a bed that have not yet been proven to be true. But there's nothing so far in the dossier that's been found to be untrue. And here we have, this is, this was just, I mean, this is truly mind-boggling. This is after Trump's bankruptcies in 2006 going forward. Between 2007 and 2010, buyers, this is buyers connected to Russia. This is from McClatchy, D.C. Buyers connected to Russia or former Soviet republics made 86 all-cash sales totaling nearly $109 million at 10 Trump-branded properties in South Florida and New York City. This is money laundering. I mean, this is fairly obvious. These guys own him, Lewis.
No business in Russia, so how can it be money laundering?
Well, if he's got no business in Russia, then how did he get $109 million from Russians?
He absolutely did not, but we do know that.
Lewis, look it up. Look it up. This is a matter of public record. These are Russian billionaires who spent $109 million in cash. These were not mortgages. These were not, and all of it was routed. And this is again from McClatchy, D.C. Now, buyers connected to Russia or former Soviet republics made 86 all-cash sales totaling nearly $109 million at 10 Trump-branded properties in South Florida and New York City. Many of them made purchases using shell companies designed to obscure their identities.
How convenient that is, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that they're trying to hide the fact that they're doing money laundering, and we've figured it out. David, in San Francisco, listening on AM 910. Hey, David, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. You were, what's Trump's motivation? That famous old acting question. I contend, of course, that he's greatly organized crime, but if you look at his allies are basically three different groups. The old 1776 aristocrats, the Tories that have always hated America and hated the Republic. You've got the Klan and you got the Nazis. So he's organized crime being led on by their insistence. So it's a complex mixture of traitors plus organized crime, profiteers.
I would say that the organized crime piece of it. These are not. This is not the Sopranos. Tony Soprano was not a billionaire. When you're talking organized crime at the level of oligarchs like Donald Trump and many of these Russian and former Soviet state oligarchs. You're talking a whole completely different level of stuff here.
Well, have you ever read about Sam Giancana?
Yeah, actually, a fair amount.
I just read one by his brother and nephew. It's called Double Cross, and it's by Sam Giancana, the nephew, and his brother. And when you're saying these guys were not billionaires, according to this book, Sam Giancana could have been a billionaire about the time of the JFK assassination. So they were money laundering, and there's a lot of foreign policy that's discussed in that book.
Right. Yeah, the big difference, though, is that Sam Giancana and Carlos Trafficante or Santos Trafficante, Carlos Marcello, those guys who probably were mind-bogglingly rich, were more interested in staying below the radar than above it. And what we've got now are oligarchs who are just coming right out and saying, yeah, I'm buying political influence. The Koch brothers bragging about dropping $400 million in the last election. I mean, they're proud of the fact that
they've gotten brazen.
Right.
They're brazen in the.
But the question is Trump trying to first of all you have to ask the question, is Trump trying to damage the United States? I mean, when you look at what he's done at EPA, he's poisoning our air and water. You look at what he's done at Interior, he's selling off our public lands and basically raping a lot of them. You look at what he's doing at the Department of Education with Betsy DeVos. He's destroying public education. You look at what he's doing at the Veterans Administration. He's got 3 rich guys down at Mar-a-Lago who are secretly running the VA from behind the screen. They have no official position. They've never been vetted by Congress. And the VA has started a privatization scheme. You look at what they're doing with the last budget for Medicare and Social Security, cutting back radically, and the IRS, cutting back radically on the number of people who can do customer service so that the service will suck, so that people will be angry and they'll want to privatize Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. I mean, you just pick some branch of government. Trump has done damage in every one of these areas. So then the question is he trying to damage the United States because he is in bed with, afraid of, or sucking up to some foreign power? In this case, the boogeyman is portrayed as Putin in Russia. Although I think you could make a case that it's China via Elaine Chao and his cabinet and Mitch McConnell. I mean, who knows,
sure.
Right? Is he doing this on behalf of some foreign power, or is he doing this in support of his own future personal wealth? Or are those two things not mutually exclusive? Is it both?
Well, corporate state, the more you study, the rise of the brown shirts and the black shirts under Hitler, they were 2 different organized crime gangs. In fact, Richard Condon, the guy that wrote Manchurian Candidate, he has a lot of different books talking about the motivations of the Nazis were really more organized crime than they were political. And so when you start looking at the corporate state and organized crime, they hire thugs, whether it's Blackwater as a thug to capture a thing. You hire a guy like Manafort who ran coups for 20 years, for 40 years. These are the big boys are actually hiding behind. They don't want to get exposed. They'll pin Manafort before they ever want to get exposed. Mm-hmm. So we've got a great opportunity. Actually, it's when you were talking about shutting down government and the actual destruction of our property. Since we the people own America, and we the people are the employees of America. All of these unemployed or laid off government workers should be going back down to the office and making sure that some strange truck doesn't drive up and try to cart away all of the assets.
Yeah, and God only knows that might be happening. David, thank you for the call and for your observations. I mean, this is serious stuff. And by the way, this point needs to be made over and over and over again. The one guy who could open the government is not Donald Trump, it's Mitch McConnell. And all he would have to do is say, I'm going to allow the members of the Senate to vote. That's all he'd have to do. And the reason he's not doing it is because enough Republican senators aren't demanding that he do it. And if you live in a state where you have 1 or more Republican senators representing you, I strongly encourage you to call 202-225-3121. 202-225-3121. That's the switchboard for the U.S. Senate. Call that number and let them know, and whatever state you're from, just say you're from Utah, you say, I want to speak to Mitt Romney, I want to talk to my senator. Call, ask for your Republican senator, and then say, or it would be Mike Lee as well from Utah, and then say, please tell Mitch McConnell to hold a vote on reopening the Senate. I mean, very, very straightforward stuff. Ginger in Seattle. Hey, Ginger, what's up?
Hi. You might want to tell that previous caller he may not be able to get through. I think the government phone line is still down.
No, we checked this morning. Sure called that number that I gave out, and it was answered. I mean, it may not.
Oh, good.
The individual senators may have chosen to close their offices or not. I don't know. We'll find out. But we got as far as the switchboard this morning before we.
Yeah, you've really hit something with me this morning. I've been thinking a lot, trying to focus more on money with Trump than the other stuff, but the other stuff is really in there too. And I think along with the government shutdown, in a way, Trump is also working on shutting us down, the base, by having them feel like, poor Trump, he's our leader, and he can't even do anything for us. The government gets in his way. He can't even build a wall. This is awful. And the rest of us are just getting worn down by all the junk that goes on every single day. And then I think in the background, there's guys that we're not hearing about that much, the Steve Bannons and the John Bolton.
Yep. Hey, Ginger, you just vanished. I don't know what happened, but Ginger just vanished. Ginger, good talking with you. Thank you. Cindy in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Cindy, what's up? Treason?
I just wanted to say, let's take this to its conclusion. Let's say Donald Trump is convicted of treason, and he's tried for treason. Would they take that to the ultimate conclusion, or would they give him an out?
Oh, I'm sure that they would give him an out. In fact, my prediction is that he's going to cut a deal where his son and son-in-law and daughter, both his sons, his daughter, and his son-in-law all, get to skate, and he gets to skate in exchange for his stepping down. I mean, that's sort of like the deal that Spiro Agnew cut back in the day, when he was Nixon's vice president and he was convicted of taking bribes in New Jersey. I fully think that that's going to be how Trump gets out of this. I could be wrong. We'll see, Cindy. We'll see. But let's not kid ourselves. What we're talking about here is either loyalty to domestic oligarchs or loyalty to a foreign nation, which is treason. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I mean, this is really startling stuff that the FBI was investigating a presidential candidate during the election even. And welcome back, Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
I agree with you. Everything that the administration has touched has damaged America, and there is an economic cost to that could be put to it. But you also ask the question of how far are these oligarchs and these? Can I call them a secret society? Should we call them fascists?
I have no problem calling them fascists, but I'm using Mussolini's definition.
So, here we are. You asked the question, where are we going from here? How far will they go? And I think the answer is right in front of us is Bob Barr. So, if we look at how society has evolved since Iran-Contra.
Wait a second, you mean William Barr, the Attorney General nominee, not Bob Barr, the former congressman from Georgia.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, who's gonna go in there and pardon everybody once they get caught?
Right. Just like he did for George Herbert Walker Bush. That's how he got Bush out of being investigated for Iran-Contra. He saved George Herbert Walker Bush's reputation and presidency by shutting down an investigation.
Correct. So, and then you have the Barry Seal part of it. They were shipping drugs. The CIA were shipping drugs into America. And then the guy that the movie Don't Shoot the Messenger, I can't remember the journalist's name, that shot himself in the head twice.
Right.
They overlooked so much and covered up the truth back then. And so this William Barr pardoned a guy for pardoned people, or which overlooked him, that was shipping drugs, flying drugs into the United States, and that's the whole reason we have the shutdown.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think William Barr.
Maybe I'm missing a logical thread here, Randy. You're saying that the reason why Trump is maintaining this shutdown has something to do with William Barr coming along as AG?
Well, no, I think the shutdown. See, he's shut down in order to get security on the border. He shut down the government, which has put security risks, elevated security risk in flying through the TSA and through the Coast Guard, because they're not being paid and they're not on duty like they should be. So, for the fact that the fact that I think it's a problem for Wood Barr in the hearing. If they go back in Iran-Contra, and
which they absolutely should do. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush should have been held accountable for his role in treason to seize the presidency in 1980. And, William Barr got him out of that in 1992 by, having him pardon Caspar Weinberger and five other people who were involved in that crime, and thus completely burying for all time the investigation. I think the Barr is going to try and do the exact same thing with Trump. In fact, I absolutely predict it. But that said, I don't see how that ties to the government shutdown. What am I missing?
It's about the security. Security is the common thread.
Security for who?
Is that although he's saying the shutdown is for securing the border, he is actually making the United States less secure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I called Senator Grassley today, too. So.
Oh, good. So you could get through to a senator's office.
Yes, sir, I did.
That's great. Good on you, Randy. Randy, thanks a lot for the call. It's always great to hear from you. I appreciate it. And thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Gordon in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Gordon, what's up?
Hey, it's not Columbus, it's Williamsport.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Right. Hey, here, David and the guy I was just on hit something that I was going to say. But didn't Paul Manafort work on the campaign for Ronald Reagan?
Yeah. And George Herbert Walker Bush. It was Paul Manafort's firm that came up with the Willie Horton ads that Lee Atwater, was the principal architect of. But Lee Atwater worked for Paul Manafort back in 1992 when that happened.
Exactly. There's your thread.
Or actually, it would have been 88. Yeah.
If Paul Manafort is involved with Trump, and he said he would work for free.
Right.
And you go back 40 years, and we've been struggling through this for 40 years. Isn't there some kind of connection there?
So to create the most paranoid pyramid possible, the Soviet Union, back when it was still the Soviet Union, decides that they're going to bring America to its knees. So they have their guy Manafort inside the Reagan campaign and inside the Reagan administration, and then inside the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. And Manafort promotes the interests of the oligarchs here in the United States, who want their taxes lowered and who want basically America to be hollowed out from within. That process begins under the Reagan administration. It reaches its fruition now under the Trump administration, but it's always been the same process. It's been a foreign power, in this case Russia, maybe China. The connection through Elaine Chao and her multi-$100 million company. Family, making Mitch McConnell richer than whatever, and all that money coming out of China via Elaine Chao. I mean, you could see this conceivably as a 30 or 40 year multi-generational conspiracy, or just, hey, it's just rich people in Russia and in Asia, their interests coincide with rich people in the United States. The Koch brothers want to see the government shut down. They hate government because it regulates them and diminishes their profits. The same way that Putin might want to see government shut down because we compete with him in some foreign arenas. Or China might want to see us shut down because they want to do their road and belt thing all over the world and they don't want us messing with it.
Hey, when you said that question about is there a common thread there, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, well, didn't Paul Manafort work for Ronald Reagan?
Yep, and the common thread is oligarchs all over the world, whether it's American oligarchs like the Kochs or whether it's Russian oligarchs like Agorolov, or however you say his name. Gordon, thanks a lot for the call. It's thought-provoking stuff. Yeah, good talking to you. Donna in Groveland, California. Hey, Donna, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom. And I want to thank you so much for all the work you do and your programming. It's a godsend. But what I'm thinking about is the field trips that the Republicans took to Moscow, Republicans only, to Moscow on July the 4th. I can't recall whether it was in 2017 or 2018.
It was last year.
But it was last year.
Yeah, it was
Well,
July
very
of.
peculiar.
Yeah, it was 6 months ago. For the 4th of July, there was a handful of Republicans who celebrated the 4th of July in Moscow, and you know, we never heard anything more about that story.
And that's what has my curiosity kind of, my antenna up, is no one discusses it. No one seems interested in what was discussed there or what happened there. But it kind of seems like if there was any mild resistance among Republican senators, it all went away after that, except for maybe a couple who just dropped out and weren't going to be a part of the process anymore. But I think it's a really interesting component, and I would sure like to know more about it. And if anybody could get to it, I'm sure it would be you or some of your
I've got the
contacts.
story. I just brought up the story. A group of, this is, let's see what year this is from. Yeah, this is from this year. In fact, this was July 5th. A group of four GOP lawmakers spent July 4th in Moscow. After several days of meetings with Russian officials, the group, which included 7 Republican senators and 1 House member, was the first congressional delegation to visit Russia since the annexation of Crimea. It was Richard Shelby of Alabama, Steve Daines of Montana, these are all Republicans, Steve Daines of Montana, John Thune of South Dakota, John Kennedy of Louisiana, Jerry Moran of Kansas, John Hooven in North Dakota, and Representative Kay Granger, Republican from Texas. And they, for reasons unknown to all the rest of us, apparently, they decided to spend the 4th of July in Moscow. Go figure.
It's interesting because Kennedy from Louisiana, prior to that trip, could be, on very rare occasions, mildly critical of the Trump administration. That's all gone now. So that's why I thought it was kind of interesting.
You think these guys went over to Moscow and somebody said, okay, we own you. You got elected because of the $50 million or $40 million that we laundered through the NRA. And, you know, you think they were threatened, or you think they were seduced, or do you think it was just a nice fact-finding trip to a country that, you know, I actually think should be one of our allies, Russia?
Right, I agree. Also, I think in the past, the hysteria about Russia, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the travesty that was deployed on the Russian people through the Chicago Boys and that kind of thing, really set a course that has been so damaging that we'll probably never see the end of that damage.
Yeah, well, it's been damaging to the interests of everybody except oligarchs around the world.
The wealthy ones,
yeah,
exactly.
My point. The billionaires are doing just fine, thank you very much, with the way that Russia has turned out, with the way that China has turned out, with the way that the United States has turned out. The destruction of democracy here, they're loving it. They can buy elections less expensively.
And what they love more than anything else is profit, and that's what they've got.
Yeah.
It's been nice talking to you, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Donna. You too. Yeah. This is the question has to be asked. If Donald Trump is committing treason, if the shutdown of the government is part of an intentional, purposeful plan to harm America, what's the end game? Who is he doing it on behalf of? Is he doing it on behalf of billionaires here in the United States who want to shut down the administrative state, to paraphrase Steve Bannon? You know, dancing to the tune of Robert Mercer? Or is he doing it, at the behest of foreign oligarchs? Is he doing it because Putin wants him to, or Sisi, or Duterte? Or, who could it be? Why?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
If you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program. We're reading today from Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amex, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980 because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Ro Khanna is going to be with us shortly to take your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. He's in a meeting or a vote or something like that. In the previous hour, we've been asking this question, and I think it's a really important one. If there's even a possibility that the President of the United States is essentially a traitor to the United States, if he has committed treason, I mean, if that's what's going on. Oh, it looks like the congressman is there. Oh, cool. Let's pick up Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Ro Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the state of California in the U.S. House of Representatives, the 17th District of California. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Congressman, welcome back.
Great to be back on, Tom. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you, too, and thank you for coming on and taking people's calls. What's at the top of your mind right now? We spent the last hour on the show discussing, is it Trump's loyalty to oligarchs who hate government? These libertarian oligarchs who think that if they can shut the government down. In fact, there were comments made back when Newt Gingrich first shut down the government by some of these same people that the shutdown of the government, if it could last a whole month, would prove 1/12 of a whole year would prove that we really don't need most of this government stuff. We could do away with a lot of it. So there's the oligarch sales pitch. Then there's the Russian sales pitch. Is he shutting down the government to harm the United States as part of a larger campaign to harm the United States that's being orchestrated by Putin or somebody else? Or is it just his nature to love oligarchs? This is his worldview growing up as an oligarch himself, that Duterte and Erdogan and Sisi and what's his name down in Brazil? I want to say Bolsonaro. That these guys, that this is just how he thinks. I mean, what are your thoughts on what is going on right now in the White House?
My view is probably simplistic, but he made a campaign promise on building this wall, and he thinks that's what got him elected, and he's convinced that's what's going to get him reelected. He believes he defied all the odds the first time, and all the pundits were wrong, and he probably thinks the same thing this time. He doesn't believe in polling because he thinks he's got this magical turnout. And so I think he's wrong, but he believes he's winning. And the problem is that he's so convinced that in his own greatness of winning that campaign that he's got far too much confidence in his own political judgment.
Yeah, well, that's a very straightforward explanation for it all, too. Remarkable stuff. Shall we pick up some phone calls here?
That'd be great.
Okay, Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. Joe in Cupertino, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Congressman. Democracy's alive and well. I just got back over the weekend from the big, California Dem vote for delegates. It was widely attended. There must have been 300 people there, and we stood in line for 2 hours, and it was the best experience I've ever had. I got to suggest that's something to do. Anyway, when we last spoke, I mentioned to you about the BDS, and you rightfully came out with your own opinion. The next day, though, you came in opposition to PAYGO, and you eloquently quoted Paul Wellstone. I mean, I don't need to go into what the quote was, but this Wellstone was very close to me as a young kid coming up, and his death was so tragic. And as we sit here and we talk about what was going on with the Iran-Contra affair and how there was a relationship between Cheney and this that I never got to run to ground. It just makes me sick to my stomach to think that this could be going on again. At any rate, I'm calling to speak to you about House Resolution 438 being forwarded by the Senator, Congressman Bergman. Is it Bergman or is it Sherman? Sherman, B. Bergman. And Congressman Brad Sherman's a Harvard Law graduate, as you are. He thinks that the case has been made in public, and I agree, that the Democrats need to proceed to the Judiciary Committee with Nedler and start the process, because if the government is shut down for another month, and it appears there's no end in sight, we have 800,000 people as health insurance that's not going to be covered. How else can we force Senator Mitch McConnell to do anything if we don't proactive? Or you can support 438 if it's brought to the paper. Maybe convince Nancy to do this as a way to get the government to reopen without funding any stupid idea of an un-American border. That is ridiculous. As I stood in line,
Joe, let's get the Congressman's response. Hey, Congressman.
Well, Joe, I appreciate it. First of all, I agree that the president is acting in a way that is abusing his authority. Imagine for a minute if we had a Democratic president, if Bernie Sanders had been elected, and he had said, if I don't get the Republicans to vote for my Medicare for All bill, I'm going to shut down the government. You would have people calling him a traitor on Fox News. You would say that they would be saying this is an abuse of the executive office. And there's no reason to set a precedent that a president for their own political causes can shut down the government. And Larry Lessig had a great piece about how that's unconstitutional. I do think we ought to challenge that in the courts. I haven't looked at Sherman's resolution. I'll look at it. My view, if you're talking about the impeachment proceedings, though, is that the strongest case of wrongdoing is still going to be made by Mueller. That report is going to come out, in my view, in the next month or two. And I have confidence in Nancy Pelosi and the leadership and Jerry Nadler and Judiciary to handle that in a deliberate but expeditious manner.
Great. Tom in Chicago, listening on WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks, Congressman, for taking my call. Tom, you too. You do a great job. This is an observation and a question. I saw something alarming last week during the NFL playoffs. A commercial came on the air, not by any one corporation or any one particular corporation, but on behalf of all corporations. He was saying, in essence, that corporate America had the expertise, the knowledge, and the wherewithal to solve all our big societal problems, including, unbelievably, global warming, which they're responsible for, in my opinion. But I was stunned. I was too stunned to get any details, but the gist of it was that corporate America, and only corporate America, not the government, can solve our problems. So my question is there anything that the government can do now or perhaps after 2020 to win the marketing war and convince people that the government is a force for good and has done many wonderful things that we all benefit from, like basic science research, which led to the internet and medical advances, interstate highways, man on the moon, defeating Nazism, all that stuff. We're losing the marketing war. The government is.
Tom, I would add to that in 1981, when Reagan was inaugurated, and he said government is not the source, is not the solution to our problems. Government is the source of the problems. Government is the problem. At that point in time, over 80% of Americans thought government was a force for good. Today, that number is 16%. Congressman, your thoughts?
I think the caller raises an outstanding point, and it's the central challenge, frankly, for those who are progressives, which is to convince people that government can be trusted, and government is a force of good and has been a force of good and has been what has propelled American innovation and America's lead. I mean, the caller mentioned the innovation regarding basic science at the National Science Foundation. Of the 210 prescription drugs that have been approved by the FDA, every single one of them was funded by NIH research. There is extraordinary work being done at DARPA that basically Silicon Valley wouldn't exist if it weren't for the internet that originally was invented in DARPA and the mouse that originally was invented at DARPA. Yet somehow, and since Reagan, there has been a systematic attack on the role of the government, and I agree with the caller that we've been losing that marketing war to corporations and the private sector. I think a marketing campaign on what the United States government is capable of doing and has done is not a bad idea. I think that should be probably part of an agenda of the next president who does believe in government.
Congressman Ro Khanna on the line, taking your calls for the hour. He represents the 17th District of California. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna, REPROKHANNA, Rep Ro Khanna. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your chance to talk with Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, right after this. And welcome back. Dennis in Ridgefield, Washington, watching on Free Speech TV. Dennis, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good morning, Tom and Congressman. I'd just like to point out that Donald Trump is a wordsmith. If nothing else, the man knows how to read a script. When he says, I am not working for the Russians, he's probably speaking accurately. Working with, in concert with, or any other word you want to use is true, but he's not working for. Now, why do we keep getting hung up on that one word? Donald Trump is a clear and present danger to our republic. I'm 67 years old, and I have never seen anything like this. I've never seen the media work for Donald Trump as they have. Everyone from Joe Scarborough to anybody on Fox, they all fawned over this man. No one would pity him now. Why, sir, why not simply ask Trump, okay, you're not working for the government. Are you working, or the Russians, are you working in concert with the Russians? Pick any word you want to use. Ask it forever. That's all I'd like to hear.
All right. I agree that he is probably obfuscating. The problem with the president, though, is he blatantly lies. I mean, he even if you asked him, well, are you working with the Russians or in concert with the Russians, or if the Russians helped you in any way, he's going to issue a flat-out denial. I mean, this is a president who isn't, frankly, that careful with his words and has no shame about lying and obfuscating when it suits his ends. So I think the only way to hold him accountable is to really have a much stronger presence by Congress. And now that we're in the majority, it's going to be our obligation to hold oversight hearings, to have Mueller come in and testify. We're going to have Cohen coming in and testifying over at the oversight hearing, and making sure all of this becomes public and we go where the investigations lead.
Gabe in Franklin, Tennessee, watching on a Roku box on Free Speech TV. Gabe, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. And we have just a minute 15 seconds to the break. If you could ask a quick question, please, Gabe.
Did you say James or Steve?
Whoever you are, tell me your name.
Okay, this is James. Yeah, I'm more or less about 5G. They're going to put on every light pole in this country. Now, maybe talking to dead theory since they already got it in California, but other countries has already rejected this. It causes multiple diseases, and it's military-grade radiation. And for all you listeners out there, whether they do anything about this or not, y'all get on this and check it out for yourselves.
Yeah, okay. Gabe is talking about 5G, Congressman. I don't quite share his concern, but your thoughts?
Well, I think that we need to make sure that the country is hooked up to the fastest possible internet service and cell service, but we need to do it safely. And if there are health concerns or environmental concerns, those need to be looked into. And I encourage Gabe to contact our office or other offices to make sure that we're looking into what he is talking about. Yeah,
the weird contrast is that 5G is operating at these very, very high frequencies that are millimeter wave frequencies. They're like the ones that they use to scan you at the airport. They can't penetrate the skin. That means that they also don't penetrate walls very effectively, which means that they have to crank it out at higher, radiation levels. But it's not ionizing radiation. It's not the kind of radiation that appears to cause damage. So,
Look at that, Tom. You've got a science background, too.
Well, yeah, I studied electrical engineering. That was where I started in college, and, ham radio operator and all that stuff.
Supreme Court doctrine, but here you're waxing about scientific principles.
We'll be right back. You can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. Alan in Crown Point, Indiana. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Congressman, this border situation has been going on for years, and it doesn't seem like anybody wants to touch it. What sane remedy do you have for it?
Well, first of all, the biggest issue is people overstaying their visas. Secondly, everyone is focused on the issue itself, which is making sure we don't have drug traffickers, we don't have terrorists coming across the border, we don't have sex trafficking. We ought not to be diverting those resources into prosecuting people who are seeking asylum. What we ought to be doing is enforcing our borders humanely and securely, and beefing up the amount of immigration judges that we send to the border, beefing up people who can process these claims, making sure that people are treated with respect and in a humane way. The border wall is going to do nothing to improve our security or to deal with this situation. And finally, the most comprehensive solution is to help make amends for the destabilization that we've caused in Honduras and Guatemala and some of these nations so that people don't have an incentive to flee those countries.
Eric in Burlington, Iowa. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Congressman, I'll make 2 quick points. First, we got to play chess, not checkers. So why don't you guys call Trump on this? Why don't you guys introduce legislation to shame him? And he says things like, "Oh, I didn't include with Russia." You say, "Oh, well, Mr. President, you probably did." So what we're going to do is introduce legislation that if you did, or anybody did, not you certainly, then you get 20 years in prison, no possibility of parole. And then you do something like if they say about the fairness doctrine, I mean, the liberal media, there are liberal media out there. You say, yeah, we're going to pass a law that says no more liberal media law. What we're going to do is we're going to introduce the fairness doctrine. You know, you got to get ahead of these guys. You got to start using their own tactics against them. Something newsworthy. Yeah, I know it'll never pass McConnell, but these are the kind of things that you can make your point by defining the ground you stand on. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I certainly support the fairness doctrine, and every time people point out the bias on a Google search or Facebook, I said the biggest bias in this country is places like Fox News, and there have been reports that have shown that they've actually had the biggest impact on the election, where cable news shows, and they're basically have become propaganda stations for a particular point of view with no fairness doctrine. So I absolutely believe we should reintroduce the fairness doctrine. We do it every Congress, but maybe we can do it in a more high-profile way, as you're suggesting. In terms of the president's criminal possibility, I mean, that has been very, very clear that he is subject to that, and Nadler has made that point. If there is evidence of wrongdoing, and if Mueller's report finds that, I mean, that they have this view that the president is somehow completely above the law and can't be prosecuted for anything, and I think that just defies any common sense understanding. I mean, if the president kills someone, obviously he still has some criminal responsibility. So we will continue to make the point that the president isn't above the law, that these are very serious accusations. Some of them could possibly be crimes, and that we need to let the independent prosecutor, Mueller, do the report. I am not for us being the prosecutors, because then it makes it political. I think we have to say that there are independent people who are doing this, and they're going to come up with the conclusions.
Richard in Forest Hills, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, I was just wondering whether anyone has posited legalizing marijuana by the federal government and letting Trump use those tax dollars that they get from legalizing it to build his wall.
Interesting.
Well, Cory Booker, Barbara Lee, and I have a bill to legalize marijuana. It's called the Marijuana Justice Act, and it would also expunge the convictions of people who just were in jail for the possession of marijuana. There are a lot of good uses for the revenue. I don't think building a wall is the best use of, or a good use of that revenue. I'd rather we put that revenue into education or into creating jobs in communities that were ravaged by the drug war, or into universities that maybe historically black colleges or Hispanic serving institutes where the drug war really had the worst impact.
Yeah, that's a very, very big issue. Is it's really a fun. We got about 20 seconds left, Congressman. It's really a fundamental issue about where our priorities lie, is it not?
It is. In terms of the marijuana legalization, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that we're destroying so many kids' futures. They get a conviction on a marijuana possession, and then they can't get employed, and then they're in the cycle where they're in and out of jail. And it's one of the biggest injustices right now. It's a racial justice issue.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. If you'd like to speak with Representative Khanna, 202-808-9925. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In addition to representing the 17th District of California, Congressman Khanna is also the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be back with your calls for him in just a moment. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. This is from the chapter, well, it starts with the chapter, A Life Edit, on page 4. I was scared. I couldn't not be. Being scared is what anxiety is all about. The bouts are coming closer and closer. I was worried where I was heading. It seemed there was no upper limit to despair. I tried to distract myself out of it. However, I knew from past experience alcohol was off limits, so I did the thing that had helped before to climb out of a hole, the thing I forget to do in my day-to-day life. I was careful about what I ate. I did yoga. I tried to meditate. I lay on the floor and placed my hand on my stomach and inhaled deeply, in, out, and noticed the stuttery rhythm of my breath. But everything was difficult. Even choosing what to wear in the morning made me cry. It didn't matter that I had felt like this before. A sore throat doesn't become less sore simply because you felt it before. I tried to read, but found it hard to concentrate. I listened to podcasts. I watched new Netflix shows. I went on social media. I tried to get on top of my work by replying to all my emails. I woke up and clasped my phone and prayed that whatever I could find there would take me out of myself. But, spoiler alert, it didn't work. I began to feel worse, and many of the distractions were doing nothing but driving me further to distraction. And T.S. Eliot's phrase from his 4 quartets, I was distracted from distraction by distraction. I would stare at an unanswered email with a feeling of dread and not be able to answer it. Then on Twitter, my go-to digital distraction of choice, I noticed my anxiety intensify. Even just passively scrolling my timeline felt like an exposure of a wound. I read news websites, another distraction, and my mind couldn't take it. The knowledge of so much suffering in the world didn't help put my pain in perspective. It just made me feel powerless and pathetic that my invisible woes were so paralyzing that when there were so many visible woes in the world. My despair intensified. So I decided to do something. I disconnected. I chose not to look at social media for a few days. I put an auto response on my emails too. I stopped watching or reading the news. I didn't watch TV. I didn't watch any music videos. Even magazines I avoided. During my initial breakdown years before, the bright imagery of magazines always used to linger and clog my mind with feverish racing images as I tried to sleep. I left my phone downstairs when I went to bed. I tried to get outside more. My bedside table was cluttered with a chaos of wires and technology and books I wasn't really reading. So I tidied up and took them away too. In the house, I tried to lie in darkness as much as possible, the way you might deal with a migraine. I had always, since I was first suicidally ill in my 20s, understood that getting better involved a kind of life edit, a taking away. As the minimalist advocate Fumio Sasaki put it, there's a happiness in having less. In the early days of my first experience of panic, the only things I had taken away were booze and cigarettes and strong coffees. Now, though, years later, I realized that a more general overload was the problem, a life overload, and certainly a technology overload. The only real technology I interacted with during this present recovery, aside from the car and the cooker, were yoga videos on YouTube, which I watched with the brightness turned low. The anxiety didn't miraculously disappear, of course not. Unlike my smartphone, there is no slide to power off function for anxiety. But I stopped feeling worse. I plateaued. And after a few days, things began to calm. The familiar path of recovery arrived sooner rather than later. And abstaining from stimulants, not just alcohol and caffeine, but these other things, was part of the process. I began, in short, to feel free again. Most people know the modern world can have physical effects, that despite advances, aspects of modern life are dangerous for our bodies. Car accidents, smoking, air pollution, a sofa-dwelling lifestyle, takeout pizza, radiation, that 4th glass of Merlot. Even being at a laptop can pose physical dangers. Sitting down all day, getting an RSI. Once I was even told by an optician that my eye infection and blocked tear ducts were caused by staring at the screen. We blink less, apparently, when working on a computer. So as physical health and mental health are intertwined, couldn't the same be said about the modern world and our mental states? Couldn't aspects of how we live in the modern world be responsible for how we feel in the modern world? Not just in terms of the stuff of modern life, but its values too. The values that cause us to want more than we have, to worship work above play, to compare the worst bits of ourselves with the best bits of other people, to feel like we always lack something. And as I grew better day by day, I began to have an idea about a book. This book right here. I've already written about my mental health and reasons to stay alive, but the question now was not why should I stay alive? The question this time was a broader one. How can we live in a mad world without ourselves going mad? As I began researching, I quickly found some attention-grabbing headlines for an attention-grabbing age. Of course, news is almost always designed to stress us out. If it was designed to keep us calm, it wouldn't be news, it would be yoga or a puppy. So there's an irony about news companies reporting on anxiety while also making us feel anxious. Anyway, here are some of the headlines. Stress and social media fuel mental health crisis among girls, from The Guardian. Chronic loneliness is a modern-day epidemic, from Forbes. Facebook may make you miserable, says Facebook, Sky News. Steep rise in self-harm among teenagers, from the BBC. And on it goes. The book Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line taking your calls for the hour. And Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman Khanna and Tom. My question is, how can we promote good relations with Russia instead of conflict? And what should we do, to build peace and constructive dialogue? Does our CIA, can our CIA maybe pull out of, or end some of their counterproductive activities? For example, we've had so much conflict in Syria and Ukraine. How can we be better?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think we have to divorce or make a distinction between two separate issues. There is the issue of Trump's potential collusion with Russia to win an American election. And there we should have zero tolerance, and we should make sure that we investigate, and we should make it very, very clear to the Russians that we do not want them interfering in our elections, and there will be consequences if they do that again, and we need to get to the bottom of what happened with Donald Trump and whether there was any collusion. Separate from that, though, we don't want to stoke another Cold War with Russia. I mean, that's basically what Putin would want, and we'd be playing into his hands. And this is why it's a mistake for us to be pulling out of arms control treaties that were negotiated. We should be, in fact, working towards getting into further arms control agreements with Putin, not trying to pull out of them. We ought to look at making sure we're not pushing NATO's expansion too far. I think it was a strategic mistake initially to insist that NATO may expand to Ukraine or Georgia, and that may have given Putin the excuse to try to annex part of Ukraine. I mean, Putin is to be blamed for that action, but it was perhaps unnecessarily provocative to talk about the expansion of NATO to the extent we have. And then we need to look at working with Russia where we can on regional situations. In Syria with Assad, initially there was a proposal for a peaceful transition from Assad that the Russians had. We thought we would succeed by trying to oust Assad through the rebels and counterinsurgency, and we underestimated how difficult that would be. So making sure that we actually are going to the diplomatic place when there's multilateral solutions required, like there was in Syria. But again, my broad point is Democrats should talk about holding the president accountable with Russia without surrendering to a rhetoric of the Cold War.
Mark in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I have a quick question about the media. I'm under the understanding that there are many parts of our country that almost exclusively get right-wing media. And I'm wondering if this is true, first of all, and what we would do to approach this. How do we balance our media so that people are getting accurate information?
Well, it is true. I mean, there are certain local channels that only play particular perspectives if they're owned by a particular company, and then there are other places where people just choose to tune in to Fox News or conservative talk radio. The only thing I can think of that would fix that is if you had something akin to the fairness doctrine, where you required these cable companies or talk radio hosts to put on the alternative perspective. But absent the fairness doctrine, it becomes very difficult to do that. I mean, you have Sinclair, which reaches so many homes around this country. It's a lot of the cable, and my understanding is they basically run slanted political commentary in those local stations that they control.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that the Fairness Doctrine would have addressed, because it addressed editorial stances by ownership or management, and that's when you had to have the rebuttal. But the ownership rules that got blown up in '96 with the Telecommunications Act, that's, I think, 90% of the problem. I wrote an op-ed about this last week. I'll forward a copy of it to you, Congressman.
Please do.
Joe in Burbank, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom, is that Joe?
That's you, Joe. You're on the air.
Hey, Congressman Khanna, thank you for coming on Tom's show. Between you and Congressman Pocan, we really are getting well informed. My question is about the corporate Dems versus the progressive Dems in the party. I mean, out here in Los Angeles, we have a teacher strike, and the LA school superintendent is Austin Butner, and he's a former hedge fund manager. And we look at the infiltration of money in our own party. How are we going to deal with that?
Well, I appreciate your mentioning Mark Pocan. He is our co-chair of the Progressive Caucus. He is doing an outstanding job. I don't think the Progressive Caucus has ever been stronger under his leadership, so I have a lot of respect for him. I've tweeted out my support for the strike. The strike is based on some very simple principles down in L.A. Basically, teachers want more pay. They deserve more pay. 20% of LA Unified right now is being run by charter schools through private companies that aren't allowing unionization, and those charters don't have to take kids with disabilities or kids who don't have English as a first language. And these teachers are saying stop the privatization of our school district by just handing out these charters. That was never the intent of the charter school movement. Charters were supposed to be laboratories for innovation within public schools, not moves to get rid of unions and privatization. So I definitely think Democrats should stand on the side of the teachers in that strike. Your point about corporate Democrats who have been have a greater corporate bent is true, and it's an ideological fight. And we need to win it. The good news is in the House, the Progressive Caucus is up to 90 people, and I do think we're winning, and certainly we've made a tremendous amount of progress over the past years.
John in Auburn, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning. It's an honor to speak to both of you gentlemen. What I have to ask is whether you, Mr. Khanna, or any other congressional members see the lifting of sanctions off of Oleg Deripaska as a possible way of the president making Paul Manafort whole and therefore sending a signal to him, or a thumbs-up signal to stay strong in that prison cell, and a possible implication of a pardon to come, and therefore another form of obstruction of justice.
It would be speculation, but it could be what he's trying to do. I would remind people like Manafort that the president can simply pardon from federal crimes, and Manafort would still be prosecuted under state crimes that he may have committed. But I believe this president would do almost anything to avoid prosecution himself, avoid people flipping on him, and protecting his close friends and family. And that is why we need to get to the bottom of this, and Bob Mueller will. I am full confidence. So I am very much looking forward to reading his report and then standing up to make sure that we do what he recommends.
John in Midland, Texas, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Buenos días, señores. My question to the gentleman is this chaotic situation making our country vulnerable for enemies, for us?
You're talking about the shutdown, John?
Yes.
Well, in some ways it is. I mean, the Coast Guard, I was told today from people in my district, I represent a Northern California district in Silicon Valley, and folks were saying that some of the Coast Guard doesn't have fuel for ships, and that it may reduce the amount of inspection it's doing on incoming ships and drugs potentially coming in from those ships. The irony for a president who cares about border security is he's defunding our border patrol agents and our border agents who actually do the security, or our Coast Guard. So it is having an impact on our security. But more than that, it's having an impact on our leadership. If you believe, as I do, that the fundamental question of the 21st century is whether a system, a democratic system with largely free enterprise like America, is going to be a model to the world, or is it going to be a more authoritarian structure like China? Let me tell you, we're not doing ourselves any favors when the rest of the world looks at this and say, look at the mess in America. So having competent government here is the best case we can make for democracy around the world.
Congressman, we just have a minute to the break, to a hard break here. Isn't it, in 1985, the Reagan administration rolled out this idea called starve the beast. That was the first documented use of that phrase from an administration official during the Reagan administration. And the idea was, we're going to break parts of government and then point out to everybody how broken they are, and then use that as the case for privatizing this. They've done this with Social Security. They've done this with Medicare. They've done this with the Affordable Care Act. The list just goes on and on and on. Is this, do you think that this shutdown is part of that starve the beast philosophy? The Republicans have been doing this literally since the 80s.
I do think it's part of that for many of the Republicans in Congress and in the Senate who come to Washington to undermine government. I mean, that's really their stated aim. They want to reduce the size of government. They want to slash government. I think for them, that's why they're going along with what the president's doing. I think for the president, it's all about the border and immigration in his nativism agenda, and that really is what's driving him.
Yeah. Amen. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
15 minutes before the hour, back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. And welcome back. Joe in Olympia, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, my name's Joe. I'm from Olympia. Is that who you're talking to?
You are. You are on the air, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentlemen, hello. I was going to talk about one thing, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to go to another. It seems as if people's understanding of government is almost zero. And that seems to have devolved since Reagan over the last decades. And an idea that occurs to me is if you guys could either initiate, endorse funding for people to contribute to, or find the funds to put on a civic show on PBS that's done well, maybe with Hollywood stars who would be willing to donate their time, and actually begin to educate America about what government is, who government is, what the agencies do, what the province of all the agencies are, and just what's at stake in, basically dismantling government. I think that it's almost desperately needed, in my opinion. It's like civics through PBS, and I'll take my comments off the air. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And how about as a starting point, just reintroducing a national standardized civics curriculum to our public schools?
Tom, I couldn't agree with you more, or the caller more. I mean, and frankly, the Republicans who keep talking about needing a common American project or a common American identity should be for a national standard for civics education. I don't think PBS would be enough. I mean, the people who probably watch PBS or kids who watch PBS are already the ones who may be informed. The point is, the problem is the folks who are not watching PBS, and what are they learning about governance, and how can they participate in self-governance if they aren't being taught about these basic principles? So this is a huge education gap in our country. It's probably one of our biggest challenges. It's as critical as the gap in science or technology education, and I would support any initiative to help fund at a very early age that kind of education.
Tarek in Griffin, Georgia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Rokana, I'm a big supporter of yours, and I just, wanted to let you know that we actually see the work that you're doing. But I do have a question. I wonder if there's been a lot of talk about using Trump trying to use certain things for national, invoke national security, and I was trying to ask, could climate change, and could we start having this conversation to actually start seeing climate change as a national security issue, as the CIA does, and to not have it a partisan issue as it typically is in mainstream media, but an economic issue. We could use real funding to spur job growth, to spur
great question.
Stuff like
Tarek,
that.
We just have 20 seconds for him to answer your question. Here we go.
That's a great point. We absolutely need to look at climate change as a national crisis, and there are a lot of things we can do, starting with the military. I mean, the military can transition off certain fleets they use that are high fossil fuels, moving into more battery technology. I want to make a point, though. No Democratic president would invoke a national emergency. I mean, Rubio was on there saying, well, what if they invoke a national emergency and start seizing industry? Well, the Democrats have actually read the Constitution, and in Youngstown, Justice Jackson held Truman unconstitutional when he seized industry because there was a labor strike, and that was with the Korean War. And what the president doesn't realize under the emergency.
Hey, we have a whole, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online?
Khanna taking your calls. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom and Representative Khanna. Good day to both of you, and thanks for taking my call. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Representative Khanna. Thanks for being a regular contributor to this great show. And Tom, you commented in the first hour how Trump has stocked his cabinet with people who want to destroy public education, poison our air, water, and climate, start a war with Iran, and continue to sell arms to the murderous Saudi regime, aiding them in the continuing humanitarian disaster they've wrought in Yemen. It's obviously a far cry from the drain the swamp rhetoric Trump used campaigning. And it also reminds me of Hank Paulson, who reportedly, I think you mentioned this, Tom, was allowed to leave Goldman Sachs with a $700 million tax-free severance package and take the job as George W. Bush's Treasury Secretary. And my personal theory is that Paulson randomly added 3 zeros to that $700 million figure and ended up giving his bankster buddy $700 billion during that 2008 crash. But my question to you, Representative Khanna, is can Congress do anything to make these greedy sociopaths take a financial hit rather than, as it is now, incentivize them if they want to leave the private sector for a cabinet-level position?
It's a great point. It's one of the things that I have found the most disconcerting about Washington, D.C., and I served in the Obama administration for a few years in the Commerce Department, is that people would cash out on these jobs. I mean, Harry Truman, the president who won World War II, there's a famous letter when he was invited post his presidency to speak where he says, we'd love to come, but I don't know if I can afford the train ride to get there. That used to be public service. I mean, you would leave and you wouldn't be cashing out. And now people are often looking at their next possibility before they even take their current job. I personally believe we need to have a ban, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, of going back into the industry that you came from. We need to probably have some separation that you can't come directly from an industry that you're going to regulate. But we need a large amount of thinking on both the members of Congress. I think there should be a ban on members of Congress lobbying or going into industries which they were regulating, and in the executive branch, because the revolving door has really led to corruption.
Gene in Guerneville, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello. Gentlemen, I think our national problem could have been solved 20 years ago with the trial of Tom DeLay, but we seem to be reliving the whole thing. The GRU, through an outfit called NAFTA-CIB, was funneling money with him and Jack Abramoff, and he ended up resigning his speakership, eventually going to trial, and getting pardoned. Hello. And here we are again. And I just don't want to see that ever happen again, but it is. And all of this, it's the money. And you're talking about institutional knowledge. Does Congress, is there any way to make sure that our congressmen right now, and you included, are not taking Russian money even unbeknown?
Well, we have financial disclosure requirements, and obviously in my case I don't take PAC or lobbyist money, and I don't have a super PAC, so I take money just from individuals, and they're limited to $2,700, and you have to disclose every single individual that writes you a contribution. Now, I suppose you would not know if there was if an individual was an agent for someone, but when you take individual contributions, it becomes much harder for foreign entities to interfere, because they can't just set up a PAC, or they can't set up a super PAC, or they can't funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars. So my view is that the answer is to overturn Citizens United or get rid of PAC money and super PACs and move towards a system which is financed simply from individuals, and then allow ultimately every individual to participate. I have a proposal with Russ Feingold for democracy dollars, where I say we ought to give every voter $50 to participate on federal elections and make every voter a donor, and that would dwarf the special interest money.
Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington. We just have a minute and a half till the end of the hour, Charisse. Quick question for Congressman Khanna.
Okay. I was wondering about the Democratic platform for 220. And, Tom, I know you've read the book, Roosevelt's Second Bill of Rights. And I think if the Democrats would read the Second Bill of Rights, just the list of them, and campaign on that alone, every person in America would resonate with that. And it's also the answer to what would Jesus do? He would do everything on that list. I mean, if religion is important to people, you should read it. It's amazing.
Thank you, Charisse.
I appreciate it. Well, you may be in luck. I think Bernie Sanders may do that, with the corollary, as of course you know and Tom knows, that the New Deal was not very fair to African Americans who were excluded. So we want to have, I think, the Second Bill of Rights, but one that's inclusive along racial lines, and that may be in very much Sanders' 2020 campaign.
Yeah, be a good thing. So the 10 seconds we have left, what should we be looking for this coming week?
Well, we're still working to keep government open, but the one thing we're not going to do is give this president what he wants. There's no Democrat who's going to vote for border wall money. We're going to continue to make the case that this president is doing real damage to real people. I mean, I was at the members' dining room today, and someone came in to me sheepishly and said, you know, Ro, my brother works for a local hotel, and there's DC is dead and no one's there and he's getting hurt. I mean, people, this is affecting real lives.
It really is. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
can support this program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, Thom Hartmann with 2 N's. You're helping our team at the Thom Hartmann Program to air our show for free on nonprofit radio and cable stations. And what you get for that is supporter-only videos from me. You can watch the entire show, all 3 hours of our program, and past shows all 3 hours, anytime you want, just by becoming a member. For more information, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. And thank you for supporting our program. One of our special videos on patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, ThomHartmann, it is titled, Could Civilization Be Extinct by 2026? You can only see this video by becoming a member of Patreon, which supports us in being on nonprofit radio and TV. So please help support our program. You'll also be able to watch our entire show 24/7 just by becoming a member at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thank you again for supporting our program. That's patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. For our book club today, we're reading from a book that's long out of print, The History of World War II, Armed Services Memorial Edition. It's written by Francis Trevelyan Miller and the U.S. military, and with the Board of Historical and Military Authorities by Universal Book and Bible House in 1945. And this is from the chapter, The Phenomenon of Hitler. It starts out, his father was Alois Schicklgruber, the illegitimate child of a peasant girl who bore his mother's name until he was 40. Alois started out as a shoemaker's apprentice. Conscripted into the army, he rose to the rank of sergeant. That was so much above a mere cobbler, he stayed with the army for 15 years. After his discharge, he received a so-called certificate appointment that made him a minor customs official with the Imperial Civil Service. He had worked up to what seemed to him high above the scorned class of common people, the peasants, and the poor little working men. That trait had its influence on his son, Adolf. Alois Schicklgruber married 3 times. His first wife, 14 years older than he, divorced him. While his first marriage was still valid, another girl, Franziska Matzelsberger, bore him a son, Alois. Schicklgruber married her after his divorced wife died. 2 months after their marriage, she bore him a daughter, Angela. 1 year later, his second wife died. 10 months thereafter, he married Clara Polzel, who was his junior by 23 years. He was 47 then and had in the meantime changed his name to obtain a legacy to Hitler. From his third marriage sprang 5 children, of whom 3 died in infancy. The 2 surviving were Adolf and Paula. Adolf Hitler's half-brother, Alois, ran away from home, complaining about cruel treatment by his father. He worked as a waiter in England, married an Irish girl, treated her cruelly, and begot a son, William Patrick Hitler. After Adolf came to power, Alois returned to Germany, leaving wife and son behind, and became a prosperous innkeeper. Adolf's half-sister, Angela, also followed him to Germany from Austria to care for his households in Munich and Berchtesgaden. She was the mother of unhappy Gel Rubal, the girl who is said to have committed suicide after becoming enamored of her uncle Adolf. His sister Paula, considered a queer person, lived a troublesome life in Vienna and became an ardent Nazi. William Patrick Hitler broke away from the Hitler clan and came with his mother to the United States to fight against the world scourge of Nazism. This young man, imbued with the spirit of freedom inherited from his liberty-loving Irish mother, joined the United States Navy. The historians of this volume held confidential talks with Hitler's nephews, some of which can be related here. He placed before us official documents which threw light on the background of Adolf Hitler. He told us about the years when he lived with his uncle at Berchtesgaden, the conduct and habits of the Führer, how in his mountain retreat, the most strongly fortified in the world, Hitler planned and plotted world conquest. The nephew related to us the secrets of the mysterious Rudolf Hess and the Ernst Putzi Hafstengegel, who fled to England, the latter being held prisoner in Canada and later coming to the United States. Letters were submitted to document the facts. These are books in themselves, which undoubtedly will be revealed in future years. It is sufficient to state here that young Patrick Hitler fled from Berchtesgaden when he became convinced that his uncle, Adolf, was suffering from delusions of grandeur and a messianic complex which endangered his own nephew's life as well as Germany and the whole world. Having disposed of 1,000 of his intimates, Adolf Hitler's own family was not safe from attack. He would break into his nephew's room in the midnight hours to rant about how he would conquer the world. As a child, he was as difficult as Alois, his father. Father Alois was a tyrannical egoist with a mania for cruelty. Young Adolf liked to rage in rabid oratories, audience or no audience. His father called him daffy and lazy. He wanted his son to become an important personage like himself. But 11-year-old Adolf revolted against going to school and exposing himself to the heavy task of book learning. He hated his teachers. He hated his schoolmates. Faced by the odious realities of life as they were fearfully represented to him by a father with a big stick and an inclination for alcohol, Adolf wanted only to escape. He was 13 at the time of his father's death and 19 when his mother died. Of the 6 years between those two events, little is known about the boy's doings, except that he prevailed upon his mother to take him out of the hated secondary school, and that she encouraged him in his hobby of making drawings until his ego became inflated to the point that he believed himself a genius. He lived on his mother's pension until her death. With his mother and her income gone, the escapist days were over. He had to face life. A misfit, uneducated, arrogant, undeveloped in mind, stubborn and quarrelsome, without any moral concepts. Such was young Adolf Hitler when he entered Vienna in the beginning of 1909. Here his ego was deflated for the first time. He could not even pass his entrance exams to the Academy of Arts. His drawings were considered crude imitations, counterfeits. When a jury at the Academy of Munich refused a painting he submitted for exhibition, he stormed back to inquire who composed the jury. He learned that among them was a Jew who ranked as one of the outstanding masters of German art. At once, he blamed the jury's decision to exclude his work upon this Jew, declaring, "They shall pay for this." Precipitated from vainglory, Hitler woke to find himself an obscure outcast. In his despair, he stooped so low in his own estimation as to take up work as an unskilled laborer. To carry mortar on scaffolding was far beneath his dignity. He had not yet conceived the idea that Providence had chose him to be the leader of the master race. The history of World War II.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
First tally.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So here we have the situation where the President of the United States, the President of the United States, the question is being asked, is this guy working for a foreign government? It must have been 20, 30 years ago, the Manchurian Candidate movie came out, which, as I recall, was China, right, as in Manchuria, was it basically owned a guy who ran for president of the United States and then, got in. It's an extraordinary question. Do we have a Manchurian candidate? Do we have an actual agent of a foreign power as president of the United States? I think probably the most damning information so far is what the Washington Post came up with. I mean, the New York Times' story Friday afternoon was a shocker. Right? Yes, the FBI, during the campaign, this is before Trump was even elected, was looking into whether Donald Trump was acting on behalf of Russia. And then, now it's not just the campaign, it's not just changing the Republican platform or, the positions he's taking, it's the actions he's done. And then on top of that, when he meets with that foreign leader, in this case Vladimir Putin, he orders the notes destroyed. He takes them away from the interpreter. And there's some debate as to whether these interpreters can even be deposed, whether they can be questioned before Congress or in any other venue. And I'm sure that, in fact, it would seem that executive privilege would certainly cover something like that, because the whole point of executive privilege is for the president to be able to, and not just the president, by the way, to the senior officials throughout government, to be able to get candid, honest, unfiltered advice without worrying that it's going to blow up in their face just because they sought that advice. So if he's talking to a foreign leader, you would think that that would be probably the most kind of classified environment possible. That said, though, don't underestimate what the FBI and CIA can pull off, and NSA and everybody else. And then, keep in mind, on the way out of office, President Obama handed to the FBI and the CIA the power to review raw intercepts in ways that may have made the FBI and Mueller's job investigating Donald Trump and his campaign a whole lot easier. But this, takes it back to these question of, are we looking here at the subversion of democracy by, on the one hand, grifter capitalism? Is this all about Donald Trump, being a terrible, terrible businessman? Pretty much every business he's ever touched has failed, including his own construction businesses. His casinos, his steaks, his airline, you fill in the blanks, right? Virtually every company fails. He goes bankrupt. He desperately needs money, so he starts getting money from Deutsche Bank, which was right in the middle of the time when Deutsche Bank was later convicted of laundering money from Russian oligarchs and directly from Russian oligarchs, over $109 million in over 60 transactions that were all cash transactions where that money went right into Donald Trump's pocket or into the pockets of the Trump organization. So is it good old-fashioned capitalism that has corrupted Donald Trump? Are we looking at the cancer stage of capitalism? And here we've got a guy in the White House who's frankly much more interested in his own family's wealth than he is in the fate and future of the United States. Certainly more interested in that than he is in the ability of 800,000 working class Americans to pay their bills. Is it that? Or has a foreign power, specifically in this case Russia, reached out and seized control of Donald Trump? Either through blackmail, through bribery, through flattery, through threats. Could it be that? Or third option is China playing in this game via Elaine Chao, the multi-millionaire wife of Mitch McConnell. He married her. He suddenly got instantly rich. And her family is, Taiwanese shipping, oligarchs. And they make their money transporting goods to and from between China and the United States. So, Mitch McConnell his wife makes her money through international trade with China and dancing to the tune of the Chinese government. Does the Chinese government want to destroy the United States as much as it is alleged Putin wants to destroy the United States? Or has this got nothing to do with any of that, and this is just, Trump trying to get rich after being broke for years and years? I'm convinced that the guy has had a negative net worth for probably 20 years. Ever since his last bankruptcy. It takes a long time to climb out of a bankruptcy. So what is it? Where does it go? And of course, continuing the conversations that were initiated in the previous hour when Congressman Ro Khanna was on here for a whole hour taking your calls. What is actually going on here? John in Auburn, Washington. Hey, John, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I want to tell you you're one of my heroes. And so are the Congressman Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan, and thanks for having them on.
Sure.
I was also hoping that you can get some of the new young Congresswomen on your show as well, because I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah, we've been reaching out. We've also tried reaching out to Pramila Jayapal, who is Mark Pocan's colleague, as the co-chair of the
Yes, that would be excellent. I hope you can get them, and I hope you can get Bernie back on more often as well. But the reason I called is because I wanted to talk about Mitch McConnell's role in this shutdown, and I think that his role in the shutdown is as great as the role of Donald Trump, because he will not allow the Senate a vote on the same bill that they passed before the Congress changed over the
right, and that bill on December 19th passed the Senate unanimously, and Mitch McConnell will not allow a vote on it. He's the guy who's blocking this. Back to you, John.
And I think that he is in the process of subverting democracy again. He already did it with the denial of Obama's choice for the Supreme Court, and now he's doing it once again with his refusal to bring something to a vote that is obviously would pass if he would let it happen. It would pass with a veto-proof majority.
Yep. Yeah, and it turns out I had been thinking all along that there was a mechanism in the Senate similar to a discharge petition where, if a majority of senators signed on to this thing, they could force a vote. As far as I can tell, I've not been able to find out what that is. As far as I can tell, if Mitch McConnell blocks the vote, that's the end of the discussion. And as he did with not just Merrick Garland, he did it with 30 or 40 other federal judges. Obama only had 2 federal judges confirmed in the last 2 years of his presidency. And so far they've done 28 or 32 or something like that. But yeah, and McConnell's role in the shutdown is huge. And thank you, John, for the call. And McConnell has also apparently taken about $3.5 million from the Russians. And as I said earlier, his wife is up to her eyeballs in Chinese money. So, what the hell is going on here? I don't have an answer, although I have a feeling that we're going to find out a lot of this as the Mueller investigation rolls on. Rob at Sky Mill, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for everything you guys are doing down there today. I think you're nailing it. I wanted to comment about the charter schools that you were talking about before.
Oh, yeah, this is the LA teachers are on strike because the charter schools are draining resources from the school district, and 20% of the people, 20% of the schools now in LA are non-union, charter schools, and that was never envisioned. Go back to you, Rob. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're ruining the entire school system across the United States with these charter schools.
That's the plan.
I'd like to see them abolished. I think they cost us USA jobs we wiped out our vocational departments in our schools to teach our kids. We were teaching skills that not everybody had to go to college before. And sometimes you might have got an opportunity if you knew how to get in the door as a floor sweeper down at Ford's or GM or something. We don't do any of that anymore.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see our senators or the next president work together to take away the funding for charter schools. The Amish and the Chippewa, Saginaw Chippewa Indians up there in Mount Pleasant, they finance their own schools. Let these billionaires finance their own schools.
Yeah, amen. I would like to see a complete ban in billionaire money in these. Bill Gates has been one of the big pushers of charter schools for years and years, and of course the billionaire DeVos family as well. Rob, thanks a lot for the call. It's 17 minutes past. It's coming up. On 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Dave in Armstrong Creek, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks a lot for taking my call. I wanted to talk about the statement that was made, by Ronald Reagan. The government is the problem.
Right.
And, now it has came to pass. In reality, it is kind of the problem because of the people that represent us in the government, especially on the Republican side. And that has gotten to that point. A lot of it has to do with money, and how they get elected through campaign contributions. And then when they do get in there, they're just the influence of lobbyists, is really a big factor too. And I'm really optimistic about, especially the House of Representatives being taken over by a lot of the people would not accept money from super PACs or wouldn't have super PACs or corporations. And that's a good thing. And I've seen this at play in Wisconsin for a long time, where we have the Democrats' vote is a lot bigger than the Republican vote. Yet we've had this Republican legislature. This all starts at the state level, and we see it in in the federal elections. But I think simply put, the power of money. Represents the power of money. As simple as that. I don't know. What do you think of?
Yeah, this is a problem that was created by the U.S. Supreme Court. When the U.S. Supreme Court back in the 19th century, in 1886, decided to say corporations are people. And then in 19 1976 in the Buckley versus Vallejo decision said that giving money to politicians is free speech and it's protected by the First Amendment. Those two decisions handed the control of our government over to a small group of very, very wealthy people, the roughly 150,000 families in the United States who are worth more than $10 million, or more than $100 million, excuse me, and that that is reversible. I mean, that's something that we have to reverse. But that, Dave's spot on. I really think that is the biggest part of our problem. Dave, thanks for the call. Christopher in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Christopher, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, this has been quite a weekend with all this going on with the bombshells about Trump and Russia and stuff. But the one thing that I'm concerned about, or not concerned about, but have a question about, and I'm calling you hoping that you can help me, is that we keep hearing the FBI open an investigation on Trump. Did that? I assume that would have to come from the top, like from the director.
Yes.
And yeah, so.
Who at the time was James Comey.
What's that?
Who at the time was James Comey. That investigation has been picked up by Mueller now.
Okay, so this wasn't Christopher Wray. This was
Jim Comey.
Comey opened it. Oh, wow.
Yeah, apparently signed off on this.
I haven't heard that any place on the media. I'm just wondering. That had to be from the top.
Yeah, I think so, and Comey's been rather circumspect on the whole thing, but it sure looks to me like he started this thing, and then when Rod Rosenstein came in and Comey was fired, and so Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller, and Robert Mueller came in and said, okay, my mandate is to investigate Trump and Russia, and he picked up this ongoing FBI investigation. At least that's my reading of it. Christopher, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Andy in Wilmington, Delaware. Hey, Andy, what's on your mind? Andy? Okay, Andy is on line 7, Sherry. He's not listening to his phone. Ed in Elkin, North Carolina. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I've said all along that, or I was thinking all along that McConnell and his Republican buddies are more involved in this collusion, or whatever you want to call it, conspiracy. And I want to ask you, do you think that this investigation, when it comes to an end, do you think it will be allowed to be that these people, if it's proven that they're, all these allegations are proven, will they be convicted of these crimes?
That's a tough one. I mean, George Herbert Walker Bush was president of the United States back in 1992, and Caspar Weinberger was being prosecuted for high crimes and misdemeanors for treason, basically. The whole Iran-Contra thing, cutting a deal with the Iranians to hold the Iranian hostages so Jimmy Carter would lose the election, and then paying off that by selling them weapons, later on in the 1980s. And not just Weinberger, but Weinberger and 5 other officials in the Reagan administration were all looking at serious prison time. And then the investigators, Lawrence Walsh specifically, the special prosecutor, subpoenaed George Herbert Walker Bush's personal diaries, because it looked to him like George Herbert Walker Bush was himself involved in Iran-Contra and had not just guilty knowledge, but was actually a criminal, had involved himself in this crime. And at that point, as soon as that happened, the Attorney General of the United States, who had been put into that office a year earlier in 1991 by George Herbert Walker Bush, that Attorney General said, let's just shut the whole investigation down. And the way to do it is to pardon all 6 objects of the FBI investigation. So George Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger, and he pardoned the other 5 people in the Reagan administration who were conspiring to throw the 1980 election to the Republicans by having Iran hold the hostages longer, right up to the election so that Jimmy Carter lost, and then selling those same Iranians weapons in violation of U.S. law and Congress. There's a very straightforward process. The guy who did that, the U.S. Attorney General, who told George Herbert Walker Bush, the way to get out of this problem is by pardoning these people. That guy is William Barr, the guy who next week, or this week, I guess it is, we're going to hear the confirmation hearings on. Now Donald Trump wants to put him in as AG, so presumably he can do the same thing, shut down the investigation by issuing the pardons. I don't know if it'll work, Ed, but that certainly seems like what they're planning on doing. Did I answer your question?
Yes. The Senate is the one? They're the ones that will confirm him, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exclusively.
The House has nothing to do with it.
That's correct. The House does not have anything to do with it.
Well, I think it's time that we do something about these pardons. It doesn't make sense to me that these people, these high crimes they're committing, they're pardoned, and then all these other people are going to jail for selling pot or something even less.
Yeah. And look back on this. I mean, Richard Nixon committed treason in 1968 to become president. He blew up Lyndon Johnson's peace negotiations with South Vietnam. Richard Nixon's treason in 68 led to an additional 20,000 Americans dying in Vietnam. Lots and lots of treasure lost, probably more than 1 million Vietnamese, maybe as many as 2 million dead Vietnamese. The disfigurement of Vietnam, the covering of the country with Agent Orange and everything else. That was Nixon's treason, and Jerry Ford pardoned the guys involved in that. And then Ronald Reagan comes into office, and he cuts a deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages. He commits treason just like Nixon did. He gets elected as a consequence of that treason, just like Nixon did. And then his vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush, pardons everybody involved so that Reagan will never be held to account for it, and neither will Bush himself. If history is going to repeat itself, what you're going to see is Donald Trump cutting a deal along with the whole Trump crime family, along with his kids, to escape prosecution in exchange for stepping down. And, my prediction is that he leaves office this year, sometime this year, probably in the summer, and that he steps down, and that Mike Pence then does the exact same thing Jerry Ford did and George Herbert Walker Bush did, which is pardon all the criminals who were involved in these high crimes so that the president himself can get off scot-free. Nixon got off scot-free, died a free man. Reagan got off scot-free, died a free man. And now Trump is fully intending to do the same, in my opinion, Ed. I think that's how it's going to go down. But we'll see. Ed, thanks a lot for the call. It's 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's talk media for the rest of us, the place where smart people get their news, the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here. Hey, if you're one of our Patreon sponsors or YouTube sponsors, be sure to check out the new video that's available talking about our poopy president. No, I don't mean that in a bizarre or even sarcastic way. It turns out that the number of people who are now hospitalized, many of them are going to need kidney transplants all around the United States. I mean, literally, their lives have been devastated and wiped out, is the result of a decision that Donald Trump made to tell his EPA to allow more cow poop, basically, to be intentionally or unintentionally used for irrigation of crops, specifically romaine lettuce. And thus, you are getting poisoned because he wants deregulation. Isn't that cool? Check out the video. It's coming up for all of our Patreon and YouTube sponsors. And thanks so much for supporting the program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Judy in Healdsburg, California. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. You know, Tom, I was just thinking that we're living in a very strange, absurd time, and everybody's waiting for proof of collusion. And with Trump and Putin, of course, collusion means conspiracy, right? And it really, the absurdity is, it's happening right in front of our eyes. He's doing it. His strategy is being open. I mean, look what happened with Syria. There was a comment from Putin. I think Donald did the right thing. Well, you know, Tom, I think Putin must have a constant smile on his face. And he probably said, Donald, shut down the government. And Donald did.
Well, this was the question that I was asking in the first hour is if I mean, Trump is either intentionally harming the United States or stupidly, unintentionally harming the United States. If he's unintentionally harming the United States, that opens up a bunch of other questions. If he's intentionally harming the United States, then you have to ask, if you look at each one of his actions, whether it's, you know, bringing Chris Kobach in to suppress more people's votes, whether it's shutting down the government, whether it's putting, a lobbyist in charge of the EPA, a lobbyist in charge of the Interior Department, putting Betsy DeVos in charge of education, you can just go through the list of all the things that he's done, and it looks like they're either intentional or unintentional efforts to destroy the government of the United States of America. And if so, why? Is he doing this because he's dancing to the tune of a foreign oligarch, specifically in this case, Vladimir Putin? Or is he doing it because this is what the fossil fuel billionaires in the United States want him to do? Keep in mind, the libertarian billionaires in this country, the Mercers, the Kochs, et cetera, they also hate small d democratic government, or democratic socialist government in particular, and want to see our country turned into basically a neo-feudal society.
Well, I think it's all the above. But I also think in Donald's mind, Donald Trump, is that I think it all started with him wanting to build Trump Towers in Russia, in Moscow. And I think there was an agreement made between him and Putin. Donald, listen, you destroy your democracy and you can put up a hotel everywhere and maybe even in the Ukraine.
Yeah, well, he's already got one in Turkey, in Ankara, I believe it is. But yeah,
but I think that's how the whole thing started.
So, this is my original question. 2 hours ago: is Trump if Trump is trying to destroy this country, is he trying to do it, or at least the institutions of this country? Is he trying to do it to replace them with institutions of basically neo-feudalism, of that just serve the interests of the very wealthy? Is this the end game of this project that the Koch brothers have been running since the Powell memo in '71? And not just the Koch brothers, all these other very, very wealthy oligarchs, Bill Gates, let's take down public education, et cetera, et cetera. Is this the end game? Are we watching this right now in real time? Or is this, some international geopolitical thing? I don't know the answer. Or is it both? I mean, it's international oligarchs. Judy, thank you for the call. These are tough questions. Andy in Wilmington, Delaware. Hey, Andy, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. I'm sorry I couldn't pick up when you called on me before.
It's all good.
I wanted to ask you, I just happened to see the movie Vice over the weekend, and I was unaware of something that was referred to as the theory of the unified executive. You know what I'm talking about?
Remind me.
Scalia came up with it. And
the unitary executive. Yes.
Unitary executive,
yeah.
Excuse me. It basically says that a president in office cannot commit a crime just by the fact that they are president.
Right.
And the reason I bring this up is I understand this gentleman, Mr. Barr, who's going to come up for AG, might be a proponent. I think he might have expressed support for this theory. Are you aware of that?
He's not only did that, but William Barr was brought in as AG by George Herbert Walker Bush in 1991. When Congress was starting, and the prosecutors, Lawrence Walsh, the special prosecutor, was seriously investigating the crimes that Ronald Reagan committed back in 1980 to become elected president. The Iran-Contra deal, the October surprise, his cutting a deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages, to humiliate Jimmy Carter and win that election, and then, subsequently selling weapons to via the Israelis to the Iranians in order to pay off that deal. It turns out George Herbert Walker Bush was up to his eyeballs in that treason. And when Lawrence Walsh subpoenaed his diaries, which would have demonstrated that Bush was involved in that treason, then at that point, Bush brought in William Barr, and William Barr suggested to Bush pardon Caspar Weinberger and the other 5 members of the Reagan administration who were involved in this treasonous crime. And Lawrence Walsh won't be able to continue the investigation any longer because he won't have the basis for an investigation, which is I'm investigating crimes, because the crimes had just been wiped out by the pardon. Bush did that, and Lawrence Walsh went out of business, and Bush was able to hide forever. I mean, he just died last year. He was able to hide for the rest of his life his complicity in that treason. The exact same thing, or something very, very similar to that, happened when Jerry Ford became president after Richard Nixon committed treason to become president in '68. When Ford was brought in, Ford pardoned not just Nixon, but he pardoned a whole bunch of Nixon people who were involved in that treason as well. So I fully expect, but it was William Barr who executed this on behalf of Reagan and Bush back in '92. And I'm fully expecting that it's going to be William Barr who's going to execute it on behalf of Donald Trump next.
Tom, can I ask you, how does such a theory become applied? Does it have to be codified or approved by the courts? I mean, if you believe such a thing, how do you apply such a thing?
What's the such a thing that you're talking about?
I'm talking about this theory that the president is immune from
the unitary executive theory. That would require adjudication. And in fact, most of what the Supreme Court has said relative to that, between the time that Scalia was first talking about it, and actually it goes way back before Scalia. You could arguably take this back to Alexander Hamilton, this theory, and it was heavily debated, by the way, in the 30s. Because the Republicans were yelling that Franklin Roosevelt had turned himself into a dictator. But that theory has been around for a long, long time. Eventually it's going to be adjudicated by the Supreme Court, or Congress will pass legislation that either affirms or invalidates it. But right now it's that gray no man's land of legal scholarship, essentially.
Well, somehow it was used during the Cheney-Bush president, or I want to say Bush-Cheney, but it was Cheney-Bush presidency to justify a lot of stuff. And,
particularly torture.
Phony war.
Torture and the invasion of Iraq. Yeah, absolutely. Andy, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Marlon in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Marlon, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine. What's on your mind?
Okay. First off, I want to say that I think that the judge that was sentencing Flynn kind of tipped his hand and showed that we were dealing with treason.
Yep.
He said that he thought that
he used the word
Flynn was treason.
Yeah.
And then he said, go back and work with the special prosecutor.
Yeah.
So go fry the bigger fish. I'm sorry, I was just shoveling snow.
That's okay.
But,
it's good exercise. I miss it.
But I think that the Republican Party may be more involved with this than we think, because if they would have lost the election, then there would be no Republican Party, because they barely hold on to power now with all these suppressions.
Well, consider this. Len Blavatnik, who is a dual U.S.-UK citizen, who was born in Ukraine and is good buddies with Oleg Deripaska and other Russian oligarchs, in the last election cycle in 2018, passed out $6.35 million to Republican senators and candidates using two holding companies, A1 ATELP Holdings and Access Industries. $3.5 million of that went to Mitchy Boy, to Mitch McConnell, Mitch McTurtle. $800,000 went to Lindsey Graham, $1.5 million to Marco Rubio, $250,000 to John Kasich, and $1.1 million to Scott Walker. I mean, this is oligarch money being passed out to Republican politicians. So
I keep picturing Sam Alito mouthing "not true," and thinking, no, what you said was not true, because it's obviously coming to fruition that all this foreign money is being funneled into our politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Marlon, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We're going to see how this shakes out, but I would say an awful lot of this is just right there in front of us. Why? Trump is either serving the interests of billionaire oligarchs like himself, or he's serving the interests of a foreign government. He is certainly not serving the interests of the people of the United States of America. That is obvious.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
4 minutes from now, we're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world here to wrap up the show today. Stick around. Welcome back. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Let's just forget about Trump for a second. If any American president, witting or unwitting, is an agent of Moscow or Beijing, it's pretty much game over at this point. I mean, the outcome is the same. I mean, I know you're a student of history, and you were doing this during Vietnam. War is a corporate affair, all right? And
or are the two mutually exclusive? I mean, why can't it be both?
Why can't what be both?
That Trump could be operating in a way that inures benefit to the oligarch class in the United States, super low taxes, stuff like that. At the same time that he's operating in a way that inures benefit to Vladimir Putin and other autocrats all around the world by destroying America's belief in our free press, by destroying our belief in our institutions like the FBI, by essentially weakening and crippling this country. I mean, the oligarchs don't like the FBI either. The oligarchs don't want laws enforced either. The oligarchs don't want regulation. They want to see our government crippled. So the American oligarchs, and similarly, autocrats around the world, whether it's Duterte or Putin or Bolsonaro, or pick your autocrat, your oligarchic autocrat. They don't like small d democracy.
No, it is. You referred to it many times. They hoard wealth. It's a sociopathy. It's a psychological disease.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, for instance, I told somebody this weekend, I said, well, war is imminent because Russia's spending too much money. they were like, well, what does that even mean? You know, Americans generally don't understand anything. That started with George Bush's war on Islam, okay? Russia, all right, for instance, the United States is producing in Tennessee polonium-238 for space vehicles, right? Well, Russia and China will know if that polonium is actually being used for Donald Trump's effort to modernize our nuclear weapons program. This is going to get to the point to where the oligarchs cannot control what is happening. We're going to get to a criticality, a catastrophic chain reaction of events. It is going to lead to World War III. This is what got me fired from the intel business after 25 years. All right? I know this. If I believe someone's just a good person and apolitical, they're not interested in politics, but they're worried about what's going on, I encourage him to do a little research and move near a ground zero spot. It'll be over in like 15 seconds. They won't feel a thing. The rest of us will have to suffer in the aftermath. I mean, this is crazy. The result is the same.
Yeah.
Witting or unwitting agent of Russia or Moscow. We're not talking about Al-Qaeda here. We're talking about Russia. We are talking about a modern, maybe the most modern industrial nation, second to the United
It's looking increasingly to me, Dave, like there's not a huge distinction between the interests of Vladimir Putin and the interests of the billionaires here in the United States, and that what Trump is operating on behalf of is the international billionaire conspiracy, essentially.
Well, what he perceives of it, yes.
Yeah, and he's part of it too. He's one of he's himself. If he really and truly is a billionaire, which I'm very skeptical of, but if he is, then he's part of this. He's part of he's keep in mind, he used to be part of the Koch network. He used to be one of these guys who get together twice a year and figure out which politicians they're going to buy. I mean, it's just very straightforward. We'll be right back. Here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
So let's check in with Bob Ney and find out what's going on in the world today. Talk Media News Report is brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. Bob is the author of Sideswiped and writes and reports for talkmedianews.com. Hey, Bob, welcome back.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
So, as a former congressman from Ohio, I put the question to you, Bob. Is Donald Trump acting on behalf of the interests of Russia, or is he acting on behalf of the interests of the billionaire oligarchs in the United States who want to see the United States government weakened and crippled and diminished so that they can be more profitable and have lower taxes? Or both?
Well, I'm old enough to remember the Frank Sinatra, Angela Lansbury Manchurian Candidate.
The movie. Yeah.
Right. So, when you look at really what, and I do want to mention something about the FBI because I'm skeptical of the FBI, but just because of Comey and his history with Hillary and what he did, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I mean, everything you look at, the meetings, Roger Stone, Manafort, Flynn, everybody connected to Moscow, it's almost like the president throws it out there that he has some connection. If you look at the actual story and report that has come out, a couple of them actually, Tom, where you look at, the money trail over there, the Deutsche Bank. Eric Trump boasted in 2014 that they didn't need funding over here, Of course, and also that Russians, quote, make up pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. That was Donald Trump Jr. in 2008.
Right.
Let me repeat that. Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of our assets. So having said all of that, I'm Machiavellian, I guess, in the sense of suspicious about the FBI, that now they say, well, they looked at it as an intel source, sort of like the Manchurian Candidate. The only reason I say that, maybe, they throw that out there and then it's kind of disproved, and then the president's able to say, you see what they were trying to say about me. I think there's a lot of potential here for extreme problems of the president on the fact of the business and what New York State's going to look into, and the Trump children and Kushner and the father of Kushner, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a money trail all over the world, but I think there's one with Russia.
So you think that, so essentially, Bob, is it what you're saying that, yeah, Trump may have been sucking up to Russia, but he was doing it because he wants to make himself richer. Trump may have been damaging our institutions, putting lobbyists in charge of the EPA and the environment and the Interior Department and everything else, but he was doing that because he wants to get richer.
I think, yes, more of the... I think the problem that, and Ellen and I had a long conversation today about this, I think part of the problem we have to be, as analysts on this, with the media, suspicious of internal leaks from the FBI, especially at this point in time, of they were looking at this as an intel source.
Right.
I'm not so sure it was as an intel source where he was, born and raised to be a surrogate, for the Russians,
right,
as much as it's a money trail.
So, in other words, if Trump ruins our country in an effort to make himself rich by building a hotel in Moscow, or by having lower taxes or fewer regulations on his own buildings here and his own income, that still works to the benefit of any government that wants to see democracy diminished.
Absolutely. It's just not a planned, plotted intel situation where somebody's placed.
So they're using Trump's greed as basically the principal tool of destruction of the United States.
Well, yes, and people like to play on that. We know the industrial military complex, the greed, war machines, et cetera.
Yeah.
It's out there. It's been out there.
Wow, it's like the cancer stage of capitalism. What else is going on, Bob?
I can't miss a day without John Bolton. I'm sorry, but someone in Iran lobbed 3 mortar shells into a vacant lot in Iraq. And John Bolton actually asked for basically a war plan.
From the Joint Chiefs.
Pentagon.
From the Pentagon.
Yeah.
That's chilling.
Yeah, it is chilling because he wants a war. Then they're having a world conference. And not that the Iranian government's a picnic. I understand that. But they're also having a world conference where even the Saudis are coming to discuss what? The number one danger in the world, Iran. And this is organized. This is what you get when you have a national security advisor like John Bolton. And this story didn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's amazing that somebody lobs 3 mortar shells into a vacant lot, and we have somebody in the White House that's trying to prepare for war over it.
Yeah, this is actually a much less significant event than the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And to think that Bolton might have tried to use this, or did try to use this, to possibly start World War III, that's mind-boggling.
It is. Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. Bob Ney, Congressman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. You can find Bob's book. It's called Sideswiped, wherever you find books. We'll be back with, oh no, we won't be back. It's the end of the show, isn't it? When Bob's on, I keep thinking it's the second hour. It's the end. So anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. Another fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. So in the meantime, I think we've all got some real serious thinking to do here and learning. Is Trump trying to destroy America on behalf of the oligarchs or on behalf of somebody else? Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From UN headquarters